Welcome. We've already mentioned several times today that it's odd and strange to be having such a wonderful time in the midst of such horrors around us, but we're all grateful. We're also grateful that this building is still here and that we can be here, and it's also a proper antidote to a week of tremendous stress and upheaval. And there'll be much more work to do when Shabbat is over. So Modeh Ani, I'm so grateful for this gathering, for all of the voices and the sense of spirit that filled up this room for the last hour. Raise your hand if this is your first time at a Kol Tefillah conference. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if you think this is your second time. Okay. Raise your hand if you think it's your third time. Raise your hand if you think you've been to more than 5. Woo! Hands down. I think Rabbi Schatz, you've been to them. Several. If you've been to this conference more than a few times, then you've heard me give a version of these words of Hakarat HaTov already, but I have to repeat them. The fact that this conference even exists is still a wonder to me. It began just as a maybe. Maybe since we think a lot in our community, but we're not the only ones, of course, about how to fuse the inherited liturgy with a sense of spontaneity and wakefulness in prayer. Maybe we should bring some people together to do it and talk about it and learn from each other. And Rabbi Chorny and Rabbi Schatz and I had this conversation now about 8 or 9 years ago, and we thought, let's see if people will come. And in 2018, a lot of people seemed to be handing me a microphone every single time I needed one. And after the first one, it was both so wonderful and so exhausting, we said, never again. And then we picked a date for the next one. And over these years, we've developed a wonderful set of relationships with many people in the room and many people who've been in previous conferences and who are not here tonight, who are all out there in the field as professionals or as lay people, trying to make the Jewish prayer experience more real, ecstatic, immediate, meaningful. It couldn't happen without their vision and their tremendous professionalism and attention to detail and really love for this work. And I am so grateful to you, Rabbi Schatz, and to you, Rabbi Chorny, for continuing to run with this incredible, incredible idea and for bringing so many special people around us to make it happen. I'm grateful that my friend and brother, Rabbi David Ingber, Romamu, and Rabbi Dina Allen are here this weekend to bring their artistry and their wisdom and their genius around this work to our community and to all the communities that are here. And I'm grateful for years and now more than a decade and a half of lay leadership in this community. Some of you are sitting right here who give the clergy an opportunity to experiment, to try new things, for it not always to work, but to let us know that our work is appreciated. And if you're a Jewish professional in the room, seek such lay leaders out in your community, raise them up, put them on the nominating committee tomorrow, because the nominating committee tomorrow is who your board of trustees is going to be in a decade. And if you're a lay person in the room and you already uphold your clergy and your community in this way, bravo. And if you don't yet, I have some people you can speak to. There is a tension in all that we do as human beings, and certainly all we do in the spiritual realm, between the mind and the heart, the brain and the spirit, the thinking and the feeling, the processing and cogitating and the experiencing. Every relationship has to toggle in between those modes. You spend too much time battling mind to mind. You might win an argument, but you're going to lose a love. And yet, if all you are is feeling, then it may not last. And in the Jewish tradition, that tension exists as well. Are we mostly people who study, or are we mostly people who pray? Are we people who break down arguments and refine positions and sharpen ideas? Or are we people who close our eyes and try to connect with the divine? In rabbinical school, there was a lot of study. And that's a good thing. I don't mind saying, and some people know this about me, I am a snob about knowledge on some level. I think knowledge of the thing that you profess to be a master of is significant. And so knowledge matters, and there was a lot of study. It's amazing how little of the content of the specific study that we did in rabbinical school plays out regularly in rabbinic work, but the ability to study with discernment and to make distinctions very significant. But at least when I was in rabbinical school, there wasn't nearly enough attention focused on cultivating the many rooms of the heart and the spirit that really allow you to be a delivery mechanism for others and also for yourself of the very spiritual experience that Jewish life and rabbinic life is supposed to be bringing us to, because we're not just a Beit Midrash. Our wisdom emerges from the Beit Midrash, but we experience life in the Beit Knesset. One of the classic stories in the Talmud that elevates and venerates how significant study is has to do with when Rabbi Chizda was set to die. And the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, knew that it was his time to come and take Rabbi Chizda to the next world. But the Malach HaMavet was frustrated because Rav Chizda wouldn't stop studying. And his learning of the text was a protective beam around death. It's a silly story, but a magnificent story. As if to say, having your nose in our holy books is a defense mechanism against annihilation, personally and nationally. And so the Malach HaMavet has to come down to the earth and sit on a cedar tree in a thin branch. And with the angel of death's weight, the branch breaks and falls right down next to Rav Chizda. And he is interrupted for a second from his learning. And he's taken. The Malach HaMavet needed to trick him, to distract him, to disrupt him, because study is so powerful in protecting a person and a people. It might even be more powerful in protecting a people than a person. But there's another thrust as well, another midrashic thrust, and certainly a Hasidic take on a midrashic thrust. When Yaakov has his dream, and the Torah says, Vayikatz mishnato, he woke up from his dream. There's a midrash on it that changes the word mishnato from his sleep, to mishnato. He woke up from his learning, from his Mishnah. Mishnah means learning. And there are a lot of commentaries that try to explain what that midrash means. The Maharzu, who is Rabbi Zev Wolf Einhorn, who lived in Belarus in the 19th century, he says the reason why the midrash exists is because the Torah didn't need to tell us what he woke up from. We knew he was sleeping, so Vayikatz would have been sufficient. When Pharaoh was dreaming and he woke up, the Torah says Vayikatz Paro, not Vayikatz Paro Mishnato. Pharaoh got up from what? From his sleeping, obviously. So the word is redundant, and therefore it was begging to be reinterpreted. In a commentary called the Eitz Yosef, Rabbi Chanoch Zundel ben Yosef, who lived in Bialystok in the 19th century, he says, what does it mean to say that he was waking up from his learning? He says that tzaddikim, the righteous ones, even when they're sleeping, they're studying Torah. And so Yaakov was a righteous one, and he may have been dreaming, but he wasn't dreaming about anything frivolous. And when scholars go to sleep, all they are is awash in a sea of learning. I don't think I am. Maybe I'm not a tzaddik like Yaakov was. But it's a wonderful notion that if you spend your waking hours engaged in this stuff, then even when you're sleeping, your mind is processing it. But I much prefer a commentary by a rabbi who wrote a collection called the Ma'or V'Shemesh, Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Epstein, who lived in Krakow in the 19th century, was a student of Rabbi Elimelech of Lizhensk. And he said that Yaakov this verse is not just about that night. Yaakov, according to the Midrash, had spent years studying in the ancient yeshiva of Shem and Ever. For the moment, just lean into the ridiculousness, but the wonderful ridiculousness that there were yeshivas that were around for Yaakov to study in Breshit. And he was there for 14 years, and he steiged away, and he knew the Gemara that hadn't been written yet by heart. And he could quote Hasidic rabbis without even looking at the page in front of him. And he thought that that's all that God wanted him to do. And then, a few verses earlier, we have the beginning of his dream, Vayifga b'makom, which we often translate as he stopped in that place. But you all know, makom is always an invitation to think of hamakom, the one who is everywhere. And Vayifga b'makom is understood by Rashi and others to mean that he prayed. He had an encounter with makom. He got bumped into by the divine. He allowed himself to open up to an experience that we are often always closed to. And only in that moment, Vayikatz Mishnato, Vayikatz mi Mishnato, he finally stopped studying and had a spiritual experience. Vayikatz, and he was awake for the first time in a long time. He was studying for years, but in slumber. And then he opened up his kishkes to why study of texts that we believe emanate from the divine is so significant. It's so that we can have a prayer moment, have a moment that grabs us and teleports us and elevates us and pushes us and prods us and delights us. The very things we want to have with the ones whom we love and the things that we love. So of course we need both. We need to build communities and to live lives where the actual ideas of our people and our tradition flow and flow honestly and continue to help us refine the way we think about the world. But we also, as Bnei Yisrael, as the descendants of Yaakov, need to be reminded when it's time to wake up from our intellects, to wake up from our cerebral processing, and have a moment of ecstasy that can't be described, can't easily be returned to exactly like that, but is sort of one of the primary reasons we're alive and doing this whole thing. So this weekend and this concept of a kol tefillah is to simmer and linger in text and ideas, and then to allow ourselves to be bumped into by the holiness of this world, and maybe even have an impact on us so that we can be awake in a way we haven't been in a long time.